Hello and welcome to our Lawdit Solicitors podcast. I'm joined by Inam Ali, who is a solicitor, and my name's Owen White, and I'm a trainee solicitor here at Lawdit. Today we're going to be talking about rent deposit deeds for commercial tenants and leases. So, in short, a rent deposit deed is a deposit amount held by a landlord for the duration of the term, usually, that you'd have a lease for.
That's right. Yes. So basically, it's a deed. It's a deed, and both the landlord and the tenant will sign it, and it records the rent deposit that's paid, and various other terms which we'll quickly run through during this podcast to give you an idea as to what that is. Okay, so Owen, if you can just start off, and then I can sort of expand on each of the areas. Really, that's all right.
Usually, you'll have a deposit clause which will specify that you have to pay a specific amount, and that amount will be transferred into account normally within 2 working days by a landlord to be held for the period of time. That's usually your first standard clause.
Absolutely. So usually rent deposits are anywhere from a month's worth of rent. 3 months or 6 months. So we've even had 12 months rent occasionally. But the most common is 3 months annual rent is held by the landlord. And the rent deposit deed usually mentions that the tenant must maintain the amount that's that's held by the landlord. So that if there's any withdrawals, the landlord would notify the tenant, and then the tenant's responsibility is to immediately top up the amount and reimburse the landlord for any withdrawals.
Yeah, because they'll define the minimum amount as the specific amount of time of rent that's payable. So say if it was 3 months, that minimum amount will be 3 months rent. So in the event the landlord made a withdrawal because there was a breach of the tenant's covenant, for example, or a want of repair that was carried out by the landlord, then they would take out from that sum of the deposit, and then it would require the tenant to top it up to that minimum amount.
Absolutely correct. That's right. Okay, so we've looked at that. The other items that might be relevant in a rent deposit deed are payment of any interest. So if the tenant hasn't topped up the deposit following a withdrawal by the landlord in time, then the landlord is entitled to charge interest on any outstanding amounts. And also there'll be some clarification or provisions for any interest that's generated on the rent deposit. So traditionally, landlords would open up a separate deposit account and hold the deposit funds in that account, just to separate it from all other sort of funds. But these days, it's from a commercial sense, it doesn't make sense sometimes to require landlords to open specific accounts for the rent deposit, so they can hold the rent deposit funds in their sort of business account along with other funds, including rent that comes in from the tenant. So there's no specific requirement for them to have a separate account, which reduces admin costs. And in those sort of situations, then the rent deposit deeds tend to say that the interest is either belongs to the tenant or it belongs to the landlord. So it goes either way. It depends on the individual landlord and what they would prefer in terms of the interest that's generated. There's not a lot of interest that's generated because as a normal working business account, it doesn't have a high interest rate, for the actual funds that are held in there. But obviously, when you account to somebody for funds, every penny has to be accounted for. So we have a clause in the rent deposit deed which deals with that.
And normally that interest is released to the tenant if it is going to the tenant at the end of every year.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it will actually confirm, when the interest is to be paid to the tenant. So yeah, that's right.
Another key thing that's mentioned in the rent deposit is when it's repaid to the tenant. So normally it's a period from the 2 months after the property is given back to the landlord with vacant possession, or 20 working days notice that the lease has been assigned to another party.
Absolutely. Yes, that's right. So those are the general sort of time, occasions when the rent deposit will be refunded to the tenant. So it covers that aspect as well.
Mm-hmm. And there'll usually also be a provision for the landlord to assign his part to a new landlord or purchaser of his interest, and this deed will stay the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So there is that provision as well in rent deposit deeds.
So they were kind of the key things that are mentioned in a rent deposit deed. If you're looking to take on a commercial lease and would like some further information on entering into a rent deposit deed, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.